The morning air inside the base gymnasium smelled of old rubber and steel ambition. Rows of soldiers sat stiff-backed on bleacher benches, their uniforms pressed sharp, their faces a mixture of boredom and quiet dread. Master Sergeant Harlan Briggs stood at the center of the floor like a monument carved from sheer authority. 22 years of service had sculpted him into something that felt less like a man and more like a warning. His chest was a map of decorations. His voice, when he spoke, landed like gravel thrown against glass. "I need a volunteer," he said. "Hand-to-hand combat demonstration. Someone willing to step forward and spar with me in front of this entire unit." No one moved. Not a breath. Not a blink. Because everyone in that room knew what volunteering against Briggs meant. It meant hitting the mat. It meant embarrassment carried like a bruise for weeks. It meant becoming the story soldiers told at dinner, the cautionary tale of whoever was foolish enough to raise their hand. The silence stretched long and thick, filling every corner of the gymnasium like smoke. Seconds passed, then a minute. And just when Sergeant Briggs opened his mouth to call someone out by name, a hand rose from the far end of the back row. It belonged to Private Daniel Sue, and the room didn't erupt in encouragement. It erupted in quiet disbelief, the kind that makes people nudge their neighbors and mouth the words him. Because Daniel Sue was not built like a soldier from any story anyone had been told. He was the battalion's administrative clerk, the man who filed paperwork. The man who always had a pen tucked behind his ear and ink stains on his fingers. He was slight in frame, soft-spoken to the point of near invisibility, and had joined the military not from any warrior's ambition, but because his family needed the income and the education benefit was the only door left open to him. He was 24 years old, he wore glasses. He had never, in the 2 years he'd been stationed here, demonstrated anything remotely threatening. The laughter that rippled through the bleachers wasn't even cruel, it was reflexive. It was the laughter of people watching something that didn't make sense. Sergeant Briggs studied him for a long moment. His expression didn't change. "Son," he said slowly, "you sure about that?" Daniel Sue removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and handed them to the man beside him. "Yes, Sergeant," he said quietly. And he walked down to the floor. What happened next is the kind of thing that people who were in that room still talk about 20 years later, not because they can fully explain it, but because they know what they saw. Briggs moved first, a controlled, practiced sweep aimed at Daniel's legs, the same opening he had used 100 times against trainees. Daniel didn't dodge it. He stepped into it. He redirected the force with a small, precise rotation of his hip that absorbed the momentum like water, absorbing a stone, and then, with a movement so quiet, it seemed almost apologetic, he guided Briggs' weight forward and past him, and the master sergeant stumbled 2 steps before catching himself. There was no crash, no theatrics. Just physics applied with uncommon understanding. Briggs turned around, and for the first time in years, something shifted behind his eyes. They went again and again. And each time Briggs brought his full experience and power, and each time Daniel met it not with matching force but with something deeper. A stillness at his center, a patience in his body that seemed to come from a place no one in that room could see. By the 5th exchange, Briggs was breathing hard. By the 7th, he was on the mat, not slammed down. Not thrown in rage? Lowered almost gently, like someone who had been guided to rest. The gymnasium was silent in a completely different way now. Briggs sat on the mat for a moment. Then he did something no one expected. He laughed. Not with embarrassment, but with something that sounded like genuine wonder. He looked up at Daniel and said, "Where did that come from?" Daniel helped him to his feet. "My grandmother," he said simply, and he almost smiled. What no one in that gymnasium knew, what Daniel had never told anyone, was that he had grown up in a small apartment above his grandmother's martial arts studio, in a city nobody famous came from. She had trained him from the time he could walk, not to fight, but to listen, to feel the weight of the world pressing against you and learn how to let it pass through rather than break you. She had died 6 months before he enlisted. The studio closed, the family scattered. Daniel had carried her lessons the way orphans carry photographs, quietly, privately, in a place beneath the place anyone thinks to look. After the demonstration, Briggs sought him out alone. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he asked. "About what you know?" Daniel considered the question for a long moment. "Nobody asked," he finally answered. "And I didn't need them to." That afternoon, something changed in how the unit saw Daniel Sue, not because he had beaten a master sergeant, though that alone would have been enough, but because of how he had done it. Without cruelty, without ego, without a single moment of looking around to see if anyone was watching. He had simply shown up when no one else would, and brought everything he was to the moment, and then stepped quietly back to his place in the row. There is something that lives in all of us that has never been asked to stand up yet. Some quiet strength that has not been called forward. Some version of ourselves that is waiting, not for permission, but for the right moment to simply say, "I will go." If this story moved something in you, if Daniel S. quiet courage reminded you of your own unspoken strength, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere in your life, the general is asking for a volunteer. And maybe, just maybe, it's your turn to raise your hand.